My name's Michael Collins. I'm a documentary director, producer, editor, and yeah, sometimes impact producer. Um, I've been making social issue, character-driven docs for quite some time now. The first film that I made was called Give Up Tomorrow, and it was about the wrongful conviction of a young man in the Philippines. And it was really focused, it was a sort of a political thriller. And the intention behind it, ultimately, what kind of inspired me to make the film was to help get this young man off of death row. Um, and then a film that I made after that was called Almost Sunrise. And that was made, I suppose, in response to the suicide crisis here in the US among veterans, and um, was about war, was about healing from war, and about sort of more holistic approaches to that, and followed two veterans walking across the U.S. Trying to heal from war. So the impact campaigns that I've worked on, the first one was for Give Up Tomorrow. Again, that was about a young man in the Philippines who was wrongfully convicted, and it was about trying to help to get him off of death row, but it was also about bringing attention to the justice system in the Philippines and the corruption. And it was about ultimately abolishing the death penalty. You know, those were the different sort of tiers of the campaign. Almost Sunrise um, was another feature documentary that we focused a lot more here in the US because it was, about US veterans. And that was about moral injury. It was a film that was about sort of the wounds that go much deeper than post-traumatic stress disorder. So people who have to do things that go against their own morals. And so the impact campaign for that, which lasted several years and is still ongoing, was educating people about this concept of moral injury. It was promoting wellness through other ways besides pharmaceutical solutions and traditional therapies. It was about changing legislation, getting more of these kind of programs integrated into the mainstream, and really about connecting communities, because one of the biggest problems here with veterans was they would self-isolate when they come back from war, which would just further sort of exacerbate the problems. And also it was about our own responsibility in what our government is doing overseas, and so it was about getting people together and talking about uncomfortable things. I'm currently working on two campaigns with two films that we have out right now. One is called Delicado. It's another film that's set in the Philippines. And again, it's sort of a political thriller, but it's more also an environmental film about land defenders in an island called Palawan who are trying to protect the last rainforest there. And so it's really an example of what's happening all over the world. And we're using just this lens of this group of people in the Philippines who are going out into the forest and literally pulling chainsaws out of people's hands, who are illegally logging. And so that film is on the festival circuit right now. It premiered, some months ago, and it continues to tour. And that campaign is just getting started. And so we'll set some milestones around that. Usually we really kick them off, as we have a broadcast coming up, which we do. We'll be broadcasting that on PBS in September of 2022. The other film that I have where I'm working on a campaign for is called Beirut Dreams in Color. And it's a film about LGBTQ rights, specifically in the Middle East. Follows the band Meshra Leila and how their journey sort of intersects with one of their fans who raises a rainbow flag at a concert in Egypt, and the tragic events that follow. So the campaign for that is going to be largely around mental health and the queer community, because that is something that's very universal. The film also deals with issues of suicide, and so as we're just starting to build that campaign now as well, and that's a big component of it is talking about the mental health challenges that might be unique to this community and finding ways to connect with them. The campaign for us that ran the longest, I would say, is probably Almost Sunrise, because that one's still going on. I think we premiered in 2015. It played on TV in 2016. And it's one of those campaigns where we set up where we were very actively engaged for a few phases, right? We had like our phase one where we knew exactly what we were going to do for 6 months, leading up to the broadcast. Once the broadcast happened, we had another phase where we were very actively engaged. And then we set it up in a way that it would sort of be sustainable on its own, really have a robust website set up and educational distribution set up so that people can come and find everything that they need to host a community screening themselves and do all of that. And it continues to this day. It's been many years now. I still get emails from people who are watching the film, who are screening the film, who are inviting us to come speak sometimes. And that has been, that's been about 7 years. So of course the attention that you have to put on it shifts throughout the different phases. In the beginning, it was just 100% of my time, maybe the second phase a little bit less, and now it's much less. But I think with different films, it's going to be different just depending on the topic. Is it really relevant and something that's just happening right now in the moment? And is there some kind of a campaign that's going to actually have a resolution within the life of the campaign? With this film, it's something that is just ongoing. It's evergreen in that sense where, unfortunately, the veterans community here continues to struggle with challenges around mental health and dealing with the government and legislation and their connection to communities. So that's still going on. Okay, well, when it comes to partners for campaigns, what I would say we always try to do is start to build those relationships early while we're still making the film. I think for a lot of us, we make these films because we're driven by, a need to make some change in the world, and we know that this film is actually just going to be a piece of it. So that's always the first thing I remind myself when I'm making the film, like, okay, this is the first half. Unfortunately, there's going to be a whole other production that comes after as we start to work on the campaign. And so usually as I'm making the film, I'll know who I want to work with. Or I'll start to do that investigation. And sometimes you might be intersecting with them around the film itself, around people you're interviewing, things like that. But I think for me, one of the big lessons I learned, particularly on Almost Sunrise, which was about war veterans, is that there were so many organizations that could and would want to use this film, but really just to find, I guess, the best of the best. I mean, this is an area where it's just oversaturated here in the US, like hundreds of thousands of organizations. And so I just really went right to the ones that had the most visibility, that really had the most integrity, that were doing the work, that seemed to be having the biggest impact, but that also could benefit from partnering with the film, so that it wasn't just a relationship where, okay, I'm going to take something from them, I'm going to be taking their name, their visibility. No, it was just, it was how can I work with someone where I'm giving them something as much as they're giving me. And so with a film like, well, first I'll just start by saying with Give Up Tomorrow, where it was about getting someone free and ending the death penalty in the Philippines, things like that, there was just a handful of organizations. I mean, Amnesty International was a very obvious one, right? Because they were already campaigning on the ground in the Philippines to get the death penalty abolished. And now they would have a film that sort of demonstrated very clearly that someone went through the system and was wrongfully convicted. An innocent person went through the system and was convicted, had received the death penalty. So they really saw the value in that. And partnering with them, having screenings, no matter where we were in the world, the nice thing about Amnesty International is they have chapters everywhere. So it always helped to connect with them before we had a screening somewhere. They would have someone come and speak. We could use their network to help promote the film. So that's also a big part of it. It's thinking about all of the different aspects that can sort of come together around this partnership. And sometimes it's very specific about a screening in a specific city, but ultimately pointing towards a bigger goal. So Amnesty was a big one for us with that film. I'm trying to think. We had a few others. Fair Trials International, which is an international group that does investigations about, you know, cases all over the world, and they happen to focus on Paco, who's the gentleman who was in the film, Paco's case. And so we partnered with them. And then the Innocence Project, that was another big partner for us because we knew that here in the US, the Innocence Project partnered with universities, and they would go in there and they would have law students actually work to overturn wrongful convictions. And we thought, wow, wouldn't that be amazing if they started to bring something like that to the Philippines? So it was a very clear goal. And it was something that, again, they're such a well-respected organization and have so much expertise that really helped us build a lot of big impact screening events. You know, we did a big screening event with them in the US at Lincoln Center, things like that, where they could come in and talk. But then we also connected them with people in the Philippines, and it was really beautiful to be a part of the launching of the first Innocence Project in the Philippines. And ultimately, yeah, the campaign for Amnesty International that was successful in the Philippines, where they got the death penalty abolished, and you know, just being a part and working with all of them so closely, but having just a few big but very focused goals for that film was really helpful. And of course, getting an innocent man off of death row, all of that, with their credibility, their visibility, the way that they were able to speak about the film, the case, all of that kind of stuff really helped us achieve our goal of getting this young man off of death row. I'll talk, let me just see, I'll talk a little bit about Almost Sunrise in case you want to use some of that as well. So for that one, we started forming our partnerships really early. And again, it should be strategic and knowing, you know, who can benefit from the film, how it can amplify their mission, and how they can increase the impact of the film. So for us, we started talking to an organization called Stop Soldier Suicide pretty quickly. They had a lot of visibility and were doing really good work and talking about uncomfortable things. You know, we wanted to be a part of that. There was an organization called Project Welcome Home Troops, which was actually featured in the film. The last chapter of the film shows one of the veterans going through this meditation and breath workshop. So naturally, when people, and having a huge transformation on the other side of it. So when people watch the film, they always wanted to know, how do I connect with this organization? How do I get onto that program? All that kind of stuff. So they became a really obvious partner because they were featured in the film. I think stuff like that has to be handled kind of carefully, you know, especially if you're going to be featuring things in the film, because the film ultimately is not going to be a infomercial, you know, about some organization, but this was the true journey of our main subject. And it became really clear that having this organization as a partner, you know, especially after we were broadcast on PBS and millions of people were seeing it, like we had to have a really close relationship with them. But even for the screenings, because after every screening, people would always have questions about that aspect of the film. So to have people in the room who could respond to that from, you know, from a much deeper place than someone like myself, who was, you know, just a filmmaker telling the story, was really helpful. And then one of the other big organizations that we worked with was a subdivision of the VA, and the VA here is sort of our government. You know, it's the Veterans Association, so it's government, but it's where all of the healthcare is sort of run through, and of course they're just massive. And this is an organization that we're critiquing pretty strongly in the film, but also, so to get them on as a partner, it was really important because then it showed that there was some acknowledgement in wanting to change and wanting to do these things. So I partnered with a part of the VA that was very specific and focused in universities. So they have chapters everywhere. Again, I was always thinking, how can my partners not only, benefit from the film and the message of the film, but how can it help with the impact distribution? And for me, I'm always thinking, who has networks in place that we can tap into, right? We all know how difficult it is to set up a screening and to fill a room. So whenever you can use existing networks, that's always amazing, and especially ones that are 100% aligned with your topic, right? And that was something with this film in particular that we did over and over and over again, and we did really well. And that's why the Impact campaign went on for so long. So we partnered with student veterans associations. Again, what I did was I went to a conference where all of the presidents of all of the different student veterans chapters from the whole country came to one place. I did a presentation there, and then from that we got dozens of screenings, that when they all went back to their universities. And you have a built-in audience, that with universities you have spaces, you have good equipment, that can project it, it's all that kind of stuff. I partnered with mental health organizations, and again, part of our strategy was to go to conferences where we would actually get paid for being there and for doing a presentation, which was great. But then we were just promoting it in a way to all of their chapter members who were there, who would have an experience and think, wow, I really want to share this with my local community. We as mental health care providers need to be thinking about moral injury. We're not talking about that enough. And so it was being very strategic with the partners and getting yourself into places that would lead to, it was always for me, how is this going to lead to more things that are happening almost on their own? So it's doing a lot of that initial legwork up front where you're really showing up, you're really rolling up your sleeves and meeting with people. And I would say in ways that only the filmmaker can really do, and then handing it off to the impact producer, people like that. So when I would go to these conferences, I would share the film, I would speak, I would meet people, I would hand out cards, and when they expressed some interest, I would write to them and copy in my impact producer, whoever was in charge of then fulfilling it, because there's just a lot of busy work that's then involved with setting up all these other screenings. But we came up with sort of a system that really helped that continue to move and that was sustainable, where we were collecting screening fees, so I could pay the impact producer and people like that, and keep the campaign afloat. I think it's really important to keep open line of communication with your partners, your campaign partners throughout the process. That's just, and there's different ways to do that. I think at different phases, obviously, they're going to be really involved sometimes. They're going to be at screenings, they're going to be sending representatives to screenings. It really depends, because the relationships can all be so different. They might just be a funder. Someone might come in, get really excited, and want to give you some funding for your campaign. I would say it's really important not to forget about them, and not to, and it's so hard, right? Because we're usually a very small team. We're working too much, and you just kind of are focused on the next thing at hand. But I think building something into your calendar where you're like, okay, once a month, I am going to, maybe I'm going to have a call with them, just a half-hour check-in. Maybe it's going to be just to drop them an email with some updates. I think it's really important to make them feel like they're a part of it, because they are, and just know that it is ultimately going to benefit the campaign in ways that you can't even imagine, right? because you partnered with them in the first place because of the work that they're doing in the world. And by constantly keeping them up to date, if they're like, oh, wow, you have a screening coming up in the Philippines. I just so happen to know that the top person from whatever is going to be there at this time, and then they'll connect you. So I think, so it's a good practice, just, out of integrity to just continue that open line of communication with them, because they are a partner on the campaign and they should be having those updates, but also because it's a way of sharing sort of ownership, so that you don't also have to feel all the responsibility all the time, and invite them to be a part. I think that's something that I noticed with a lot of my campaign partners, that very early on, I try to clearly communicate to them, I am not here to ask something from you. I'm not here to tell you what I need. This is an invitation for collaboration. And I mean, really, I try to approach every phase of the film with that, whether it's with the subjects of the film, the people that my crew, like all that kind of stuff. Just always having that spirit of collaboration and really, that and creating those moments where you have space, where you're giving people the opportunity to chime in, to say, okay, I see that you've been doing this for the last 3 months. It's been making me think this. Let me help with this next part of the campaign. And those relationships are going to fade, and they're going to have to at a certain point. You just can't maintain them all the time. But yeah, I I think that is probably the best practice, is just to build in little check-ins on the phone, to send out emails. The other thing that we did, which is, I know it's changing now because of whatever spam filters, but we used to send out newsletters. We would go out to screenings and do something very old school. We would hand around a clipboard and while we were doing our Q&A, and just pass it around, and you have to know your audience. Our audience was into that. They were a little bit older. They would write down their email address. We would put it out there, but then we would as we were taking photos from that, any videos we might be building from those, by the end of the month, we would put it out in a newsletter. That was another way to stay engaged with our partners, because we were featuring them, and I think that's really important, is to take any opportunity that you can to continue to promote them, to promote the work that they're doing, and know that it's not just a direct line, that you're doing some of this stuff publicly, which is also really helpful. Yeah, I think the question around how do you express your gratitude, I suppose, in a way, to the partners that you're working with, it can be different, right? Some of it I'll build right into when we reach out to them in the first place. Like I'll think very clearly, this is what the partnership can look like, as much as I can envision it now, knowing that it's organic and it's going to take a life of its own. But I would like to invite you to have a presence at certain films. If we do a series of screenings in a region where you're based, we will co-sponsor them. Your logo will be up before. We will put out, X amount of short videos on Facebook, when people were still using Facebook, and we'll brand that at the end. We'll thank you on that video. There's a number of different ways. For example, one of our partners for Almost Sunrise was the Kubli Foundation. Right now, this is a really small regional mental health organization from an area of the country where our main subjects of that film were from. So they had a very personal connection to it. They saw that the film was dealing directly with the issues that they as an organization cared about, a lot around mental health, depression, suicide. And we showed them a video at their board meeting. After we did our premiere, we also piloted all of these extra activities that really took the film outside of the theater, and found ways to put our impact campaign into practice and to give people an experience. And it's maybe a longer answer that we can get into after if you're interested. but they watched. So, and what we did was we brought two camera people, you know, to cover this event, turned it into like a 6-minute video, shared that with them. They were so moved. They gave us more money than they had ever given anyone. They gave us like probably 75,000 US. And for a little, you know, grassroots impact campaign, that made a big impact on us. That really kind of gave us a big boost. So we branded our website, which now we had money to make. We branded it with their logo. So now when you go to the Almost Sunrise website, you'll see, you know, a big thank you in the upper right-hand corner of every single screen that this website was made possible because of, you know, when we made any materials, when we did our discussion guide, our lesson plan, all that kind of stuff, we branded it with them. A big part of that campaign for us was creating short videos. We wouldn't, you know, we wouldn't spend a ton of money on it, but we would have someone, some kind of production assistant, myself, I would bring a camera with me, you know, whoever, we would collect a little bit of footage at our screenings, and then we would turn them into shorts and put them online, and we would brand it, you know, and there might be more than one. So if we got some extra money from someone else, we'd put that there as well. Publicly thanking them anytime we got an award, you know, we would always make sure that we thanked them. So those are ways, I think, just to on our DVD, you know, when people still had DVDs, we put them on our poster, you know, we put their logo on our poster, we put their logo on our DVDs, all that kind of stuff. Any opportunity we would see, it's not really costing us anything. These are ways that are, you know, that they'll really appreciate, that'll be really helpful for them, and that really aren't breaking the bank for us. These are, you know, giving people credit where it's due is just, it's a really easy thing. So any opportunities in doing interviews for press, for you know, print or TV, anything like that, if there was an opportunity to mention an organization that we were partnering with, I would always look for that. Yeah, I think clearly defining what the partnership is going to look like up front is really helpful. And it's not because you're going to get into some litigation or you're worried about that or anything, but it's really just nice. People like to know what to expect, and you want to be, um, you know, it's a good way to help keep them accountable, to keep yourself accountable. Like I said, you know, we can really get stuck in the weeds in the day to day on these impact campaigns. So a lot of times what I'll do, the first step that I'll get from these organizations is a letter of support. So as I'm fundraising for the impact campaign, which we all have to do, which is a lot of fun because there's so much money out there for impact campaigns. But one of the things that's really helpful is to show, well, listen, Amnesty International really thinks that my film is going to benefit some of the work that they're doing in the world, or this organization or this organization. So I'll have some conversations. I mean, initially what I'll try to do is get the decision makers at those organizations into a screening. You know, it's one thing to share it with them online, and we have to do that a lot of the time. But if you have a physical screening and they can be there in a space and feel the energy of the room, witness a Q&A, listen to people's response to the film, the emotional response, there's something that's really magical about those moments. So I would say when you're trying to create partnerships, for me, one of the first things I always do is I think, okay, where are they? Can I do a screening in that? Do I have a festival screening coming up there? Something like that. And can I get them in the room? And then I'll ask them for a letter of support, you know, and then I'll tuck that away because that's really helpful to use to, you know, add on to any funding applications that you're putting out there. And then I'll talk about what the partnership is going to look like, you know, and it's going to be different. It's going to be different depending on how much money you have to actually run this campaign. You know, you might not have that much money, and it might just be really them giving a lot to you and helping with certain things. You know, you just kind of have to. It's going to be so unique each time, but having something on paper, some kind of MOU, is helpful. And that also gives you an opportunity to stop and think, what can I do? What can I give to them, oh, okay, so if when we do build a website, I'm always going to have them featured at the top. I'm going to have their logo up. It's going to be at the bottom of every screen. I'm going to have links to their things. Anytime I do a post, I'm going to tag them. I'm going to hashtag this, you know, so you can start to think about all the ways that you can give to them, list those out, and the same in return, you know, and then it doesn't have to be some contract that goes through, you know, your entertainment lawyer vetting it. It's more of a friendly agreement, but it is certainly worth it. And, you know, maybe you are doing a topic where it's something that a lot of people are making films about. I don't know. And if you've built a relationship with an organization over time and you've invested a lot in that, you might want to protect that. And you might want to say, hey, listen, this is our timeline. This is when our film is premiering. This is when it's going to be on TV, whatever it is. And you don't want them maybe out there working with 5 other films on the same thing. And you want them to focus all their energy in one place. I don't know if that's true, right? Like, but I'm just saying, for example, anything that you think that you need to put into writing to protect your time, your energy, and theirs ultimately, because it's going to benefit them too. You know, that's the time and the space to get it into writing. You know, of course, there are mistakes that you're going to make in this process, because there's no rule book, right? Where, you know, every film is so unique. The subjects are so unique. Our partners are going to be very specific. I'm trying to think of mistakes that I've made with partners. The biggest mistake or regret that I would have is not maintaining the relationship as actively as I could throughout the process, more, because I think it's so beneficial. These are people, like, this is their life, this is their work, they're you know, and they want to be a part of it. And I think we can get so stuck and distracted and focused on other things. So I would say that there were probably aspects of my campaign that would have been much more successful if I had the bandwidth or someone on my team who was literally just like in charge of, you know, or one of their responsibilities or one of the things that we did was just maintaining an open line of communication, checking in. You know, we talked earlier about the importance of that, but I think the reason why I'm saying it is because it's something that it's, you know, where I've made a mistake in the past and not maintained those relationships. Um, you know, the length of the campaign, at a certain point, you just get exhausted and you kind of have to walk away, or it's not sustainable anymore. But these organizations are there and they're going to be there. And you can find ways to build your film into the legacy of their curriculum, you know, sort of moving forward in the work that they do in the world. And some of that just comes with, yeah, maintaining that relationship, keeping an open dialogue, and not making it just about like one thing, one event, and then just moving on. So, I mean, I've made a lot of other mistakes on campaigns, but I would say specifically with partners, that would be it. Just not continuing the communication. So one of the things that I learned, especially on the Almost Sunrise sort of tour, was that when you have a film that really emotionally impacts people and they want to do something, of course, you should have a list of things to harness that energy and direct it towards your impact goals. But I also think that it's really important to be able to be present, to listen to what they might want to do with it, you know, and to really hear that and just know that there could be a whole aspect to your impact campaign that you haven't even dreamt of yet, but that you also have to just build in the bandwidth to be present for, to listen to, you know. So when we did some screenings in Colorado, at the Mountain Film Festival in Telluride, there was someone in the room who happened to be like a community outreach coordinator for an organization called Alpine Bank. It was this regional community bank that was in that, in different parts of Colorado. And they reached out and they were like, we love the film. It, we like to do work with veterans. We'd never thought about partnering with the film, but I wonder if there's some way that we can work together. So we said, yes, of course, and kind of made something up. And what we did was we found out like the 10 main cities where they were located. And we said, why don't we do screenings in each of those cities? That's a gift to the community. You can sponsor those screenings. You give us a little bit of a screening fee. Then you invite people and it's free. They can give a donation. And at each one of those screenings, we're going to partner with a local organization. So we're allowing community leaders from that, so you have someone from your bank there essentially saying that we care about our community. We want to strengthen the community because we know that that strengthens our business. So we're directly helping them sort of live out their mission. But they were creating a space for other people to come together. It was ticking all the boxes on our goals for an impact campaign, because it was educating people, it was creating community, it was doing all of these things. So they sponsored these 10 screenings, but then on top of that, they're a bank, and they have someone who's like in charge of their communication, and they did all kinds of outreach. So we got tons of press. So the head of their community outreach for the bank was on the local news on all these different channels. There were newspaper articles coming out. I showed up, they invited me to some of the screenings. They invited some of our subjects to some of the screenings. So we built it in a way where we could really lay it out and say, okay, for these 10 screenings, you can bring in the filmmaker for this one, you can bring in the subjects for this one. We're going to then film a little bit of each of the screenings, and then I'll build a video at the end. And that, I think, got them really excited, because there was this legacy piece where, while they were approaching it from a place of really wanting to give to the community, there's always a little value added when you say, and by the way, we're going to capture all of this and let it live online forever, so that you can, that's so valuable to them. And also it's valuable to us, because now we have a piece that we can go to another state, to another organization, and say, hey, look at what we did with Alpine Bank. How do we adapt this for you? And it just really worked for everyone. It was something that we never would have imagined doing, but it was one of the most valuable kind of partnerships. And it just led to so many more down the line. Having milestones in place for the impact campaign is really helpful, because if you don't, it can become very reactive. I think that you have to allow for that anyway, because these things are organic. So you do have to be able to react at certain points, but also being very intentional and setting time frames is also important. Especially if you're going out to raise funds, you need to know at a certain point you have to say, okay, I'm done now, or I can't go on anymore unless we have more funds, and be able to make those decisions based on some intention that was set, as opposed to just, well, I still really care about this subject, so I'm just going to keep on giving my time constantly and my energy to this, whether or not I'm getting paid, or whether or not it's, really making a huge impact in the world, all that kind of stuff. So I think that was something that we learned from my first film, Give Up Tomorrow, where we were very reactive, right? Because we were just so focused on making the film. And then when we showed it, everyone was like, I want to do this, I want to do this. And we were trying to scramble. So with Almost Sunrise, we really set it up to create an impact distribution model based on what we had learned from other films, what we had learned from, workshops and fellowships like this, and partnerships that we had made, but also that we were able to design based on the niche that our film was kind of fitting into, and our specific audience and the communities that existed around that. So we set it up into 3 phases. phase one was going to be our premiere in our festivals. And, we knew that this was going to go on for about 6 months because we were going towards our broadcast date. We had a broadcast set up in the US. And we just decided, okay, for this, we are going to focus 100% on building partnerships and getting as much press as we can, and really starting to plant the seeds around the impact campaign that was going to, go on for phase two. And that's, as I mentioned earlier, if there were people that we really wanted to bring in as partners for the impact campaign during phase one, while I knew we were going to be at festivals, we would make sure to get them there. And it's so much work just being at a festival and working with a publicist and getting press and doing all of that kind of stuff if you're able to, or doing that yourself, working on little press releases and knowing, okay, I'm going to this area, I'm going to reach out and be my own publicist and do some outreach just to get the right people in the room and just focus on that. And then based on all the partnerships, the relationships that you build, the press that you get, then start pulling from that, and that's what I did, because now I had all of this content basically to pull from. And I think, oh, I want to work with the National Association of Mental Health or whatever. And I had this amazing, prominent social worker at this screening, or I had this person here, and I made a point to go get a quote from them, or I made a point to go do this. So at all of those screenings, it was very intentional. Like I knew who was in the room. I invited people, and I would go up and say, hey, can I ask you a couple questions on camera? Or write to them an email after and say, hey, could you tell me what's your response to the film and how you think this would benefit your community? And start to build up all of this content that you can then turn into materials for the next one. So now for phase two for us, it was our community screening tour. Yeah, so the festivals, that has a built-in sort of structure to it, right? Like they have audiences built in, they go out, they do all the marketing, they do all that kind of stuff. For us, we knew that we wanted to do a really robust community screening tour before this was broadcast, and so we worked with an organization called Film Sprout, which has since been purchased by Picture Motion. But essentially Film Sprout's specialty was doing community screening tours, was helping to support that based on your topic, right? So they had relationships built with different kinds of organizations all over the country. And what I would do is, create some materials, create some newsletters. I would go out and continue to build these relationships. I would now follow up with people who I met at our festival screenings, and I would introduce them to our partners at Film Sprout. I would make that introduction, and then they would talk to them and say, okay, let's do a community screening. And there would be, it was financially sustainable. We decided we were going to create an impact distribution model that actually paid for itself. So it cost us X amount a month to work with Film Sprout, and we were essentially breaking even. And that for me was success, right? I don't think any of us are in this work because we think that we're going to be making a ton of money. But if we can at least be breaking even, that's fantastic. So for the next 6 months, I was reaching out to the people I had met earlier, community groups, corporations, so for example, this bank that reached out to me that I mentioned, the Alpine Bank, who wanted to find a way to work together. I talked to Film Sprout. I said, what can we do? And we set up this 10 screening tour in their region, and we were going to charge X amount for each screening. And for bigger corporations, we would charge more. If I was going to show up at a conference and we were going to show the whole film, we would ask them for $2,500, $5,000, whatever it was, because then that would allow us to give it for free if we wanted to, or for next to nothing to much smaller organizations, to a little, church group or whatever that doesn't really have a big budget, but whose community, it's really important for us to connect with, because that's part of it. So that was phase 2 for us. And again, we had it set with a date because we knew that we had a broadcast coming up on PBS on a certain date, and we could only afford to work with FilmSprout for so long. I only had so much energy I could put out into the world. So I was like, okay, for the next 6 months, I am going to fly here, go there, pick up the phone, do all of these things, really hustle. It's something that could go on and on and on, but I think, at a certain point, we also are filmmakers and we want to move on to the next project too. And then phase 3 for us was after the film came out. That really kicked off the educational component of the film for us, because a lot of educators see the film when it's on PBS. So again, we were working with Third Stage, we were working with Aaron Sorensen, different people. So we kind of pared down how much we were spending every month, how much time and energy investment that we as the filmmaking team behind the film had to put into it, and started to work with partners that were really starting to sort of automate, is that the word? Make the campaign sort of run on its own. So we had an educational partner in place, which for us was New Day, which still is kind of us doing the work because it's a co-op. But we were working with a theatrical distributor. We were working with an online educational distributor. So it was more now taking from what we had learned from the past, the partnerships we made from phase 1 and phase 2, turning those into newsletters, targeted newsletters, and just blasting them out to people, and having the film live in the world in ways that didn't require us as much to go out and physically support it. Always in place, there were mechanisms for people to, I think one of the most important things was having a discussion guide and lesson plans. We had that created professionally and had it online for free. So people download that. That's really incentive to have a screening, because you're like, wow, there's all this stuff in place. This is how I can use it with my community. Really empowers people to feel like they can, with confidence, host a screening on their own. We put up all the materials, posters, digital materials, trailer, clips from the film, things that anyone who wants to sort of take ownership of aspects of the campaign could do it on their own without us. So basically what FilmSprout was doing for us in phase 2, we were now trying to empower people to do on their own, just by coming to our website, being able to gather all that stuff. There still was a mechanism in place for them to license the film. We have the film up on New Day they could have a one-off screening for very little, or they could license it forever. We also found a way where we decided we were going to unblock our, license. So when people would buy the film, we would say, you can use it forever. You can charge for tickets. You can turn this into a fundraiser for your own organization. So by you giving us $200, $95, $500, whatever it is, depending on the kind of organization, we would say, this is your film forever. And we would put this in writing, and you can, like I said, you can charge for it in whichever ways that supports your organization. And in that sense, so for us, phase 3, we put a lot of energy behind it for the first year. So this whole thing was about a 2-year campaign. So phase 1, 6 months, premiere in festivals. Phase 2, community screening tour, another 6 months. Phase 3, for about a year, this was the educational, TV, theatrical, all of that kind of stuff, and really focusing on it for about a year. And then knowing that for each one of these phases, there should be some funding in place for the core team who's actually going to be putting their time and effort into it. And it's just going to be less and less money, just now to the point where none of us are getting paid, but the campaign, in a sense, is still going on because all of this stuff still exists. I'm still responding to emails. It might be a couple times a month, it might be a couple times a week. It just really depends. People reaching out, wanting to show the film, and they might say, hey, will you come and zoom in? Can I reach out to the subjects of the film? All that kind of stuff. So at a certain point, when it's not happening every single day, you can manage the long tail of this. And yeah, just having everything in place to keep it going. But at a certain point, I think you do need to stop and say, I'm finished now, because again, I could lean back into any aspect of this campaign and bring it back to life, right? You could just focus more time, more energy, start to build these partnerships up. But I think for our own sanity, for our own financial security, emotional kind of well-being, you know, it's nice to have these dates in place and to hold to them. And even if they're just sort of symbolic, and then you stop and then you reassess, you bring the team together, and maybe it's just yourself. A lot of this we work on really by ourselves at a certain point, and you just say, okay, what are my goals right now? Have I done enough? Do I feel like I've succeeded in a way? Have I empowered my partners to continue to run with this? Have I empowered the public to continue to engage with this content in a way that's meaningful? And if so, can I now set it free into the world and move on to my next project? And that's really a question that only you can answer. So, you know, funding for impact campaigns is always so tricky, right? You know, I think at a certain point, we all just want to value our time and our energy and say that as much as, you know, this is coming from my heart, I've made this film because I want to make change in the world. So we're so motivated to keep on working on it. And, you know, whether or not we have funds. And that's tough. That is, I think that's what's really unique about our, say, our industry, you know, who we are in the world, because we can also be taken advantage of. We also can spread ourselves really thin. We can also exhaust ourselves and do those things because, you know, so I think it's something we have to be careful about. So I would say making sure that you have some funds in place is really important, and monitoring that and putting little stops in place. Like when the funding runs out, I need to stop, or I need to ask for help, or I need to stop and raise more funds before I put more time into it. But I think the reality is there is a momentum that starts to happen as your film gets out into the world that's organic, and people start to want to do things with the film, and you're responding and you're moving no matter what's happening in your bank account. And so I think that it's, you know, for me at a certain point, if I could no longer pay rent, I'm like, oh, wait a second, even though I feel like I'm being really productive and I'm being really successful and the film is getting out there, if there is not some return on that, then I'm missing something. You know, I have to stop. So, you know, that I would say that that's what I did with my first film. It was no matter what, I gave up my apartment and I was living with and I was doing all the things because nothing else mattered except this. And now I think, you know, we really have to not do that as much as possible and really signal to the industry, to the world, to ourselves that this is valuable work, that we deserve to be paid for it, that we're providing a service, you know, to the world, and really stop and make sure that you're getting paid. I would say that with my second campaign, I made sure that I stopped at a certain point when there wasn't any funding, and I also made sure that I really took seriously getting funding. And I think a way to do that is to sit down and to think about the campaign beforehand and to create a budget. I don't love doing that stuff. Like that's stuff that's great to work with an impact producer on. I think as creative people, you know, for me, that tends to hurt my brain when I have to think about numbers and have to think about budgeting and all this kind of stuff. But by doing it, you're really empowering yourself to be present for the campaign, you know, when it comes in. And And for me personally, I guess I just had to change the story that I had in my head. When you're out there asking for money, it's like you always think, because we're creating this from a place of wanting to make some change in the world, but then when you're asking for people for money so that you can actually eat and pay rent and do all these things, you feel like you're taking something that should be spent some other way, and that's crazy. We should be comfortable. We should be, we should be able to live within our means, and do this work and not always be the sort of starving artists that are out there trying to change the world. So build a budget, find an impact producer, and then roll up your sleeves and make sure that you get some money in the bank before you dive in 100%. And I think also when you have different campaign partners, when they see, okay, the campaign is not moving until this happens, it will really help to energize the fundraising aspect of it. Because if you're just out there doing it, whether or not there's any funding, well, then why are people going, why is the funding going to come? So I think it's about drawing really just healthy boundaries around this stuff and having check-ins and holding yourself to them. Yeah, so there's one other thing I would share. I think because it felt unique to one of the campaigns that we did and something that I hadn't seen a lot, but also something that really benefited us and the longevity and success of the campaign was the use of creating videos. And, for me, when I started making impact campaigns many, many years ago, it was a very different digital kind of landscape that we were living in. So you would have to report the metrics on like how many hashtags and how many likes on your Facebook page and all these kinds of things, which aren't necessarily that useful anymore. We know that. And it was also ways of measuring things that were very, I don't know, very arbitrary or very mechanical, where I think a lot of what the funders are realizing and what we're realizing is that there's a human element to this that's immeasurable, right? So one person may be at your screening that's going to be impacted by this, and the ripple effects of how they then move through the world, we'll never know. It's not something that we can really catch. We don't know who they are. They might be the head of some organization that now sees things differently, and everything is going to change. And that's the beauty of all of this, right? We're just doing it and knowing that sort of butterfly effect is happening out there. But there is also something about showing up at your screenings and capturing some of that. So we knew for our Almost Sunrise tour that we were going to have unique people in different screenings, whether it was a group of healthcare workers, or whether it was veterans, or whether it was philanthropists, whatever it was, we knew that there were going to be unique people there. And we wanted to capture some of what they said and their response to it. So I would have someone there with a camera, even if it was just me, myself, and I would take 5 minutes, 10 minutes after the screening and go up and do a little man on the street interviews and ask some people. And I would capture a little bit of footage. I would capture the setup, so I could just create these little 2-minute pieces that were showing, and I would feature whoever organized it. So some head of a student organization at this school organized it. So it's also giving them attention. So in a way, it's a way to give back to your partners by capturing this thing that they've put so much love and energy into. So you're now going to feature that, capturing aspects of the Q&A. So if you're going to do a little Q&A after, capturing some highlights from that, and then asking a couple people. So it's not a huge production. Granted, all of us know that we could spend a fortune and really make the super high production values. You don't have to. It's keeping it really grassroots, capturing just the energy and that experience of that particular moment. And then in hotel rooms, as I was on tour with the film, I would sit and in a night or two, just kind of put this stuff together with some of the money that I had already gotten for the campaign. I would brand it. So now I'm making my funders happy because I'm putting out content in the moment. The people that just did the screening, whatever, the week before, I'm now giving them content to share. And it's also building content for our own campaign. And what came from that was many more screenings, because now people who saw it, they're like, oh, I want to do that, or my funders were really happy. They're like, wow, look at the emotional response that this audience member had. They just showed how this has changed their life. And I want to give you more money so you can do more of this. So it was ways that were, I think, we as filmmakers have a unique skill set where we're storytellers, right? And we know how to use these tools. So why not use that instead of me trying to organize all of these metrics and this and that and create little charts and graphs about, how many hashtags are now out there about moral injury and whatever it is that might be really interesting to some of the funders. By sharing this human side of it, it energized the campaign in ways that I can't even tell you. It was, and then also when I would do outreach to another organization, let's say I did a screening with like Georgetown University with their Student Veterans Association or, chapter, and I filmed it, I would take that video and send it to another big university and say, hey, look at what we just did over there. Don't you want to do this with your group? They're like, hell yeah, that's amazing. Look at what, instead of me just writing it as bullet points with a photograph, actually seeing something on screen, to this day, those videos keep the campaign going. People are watching them. So I created a section on our website that just housed all of them. I would push it up through Facebook. Then I would put them up on YouTube. You can put them up on Instagram again, too. You're also creating content. That was something I was always thinking about. How am I capturing and creating content that's going to energize our social media campaign that can be repurposed, not only across all of our different platforms, but how am I also empowering my partners to do the same? So you might just be taking pictures after a screening and tagging the people there, which is great. And then they're going to tag, they're going to repost it. But when you create stuff like this, it just moves out there in such a bigger way. So it's a really long way of saying, bring a camera with you and capture some videos and make some videos around key event screenings. The last thing I'll say is that we made a point to do this, and I did mention this earlier, at our premiere. So we played at the Telluride Mountainfilm Festival, and we told them, okay, we'll play there, but we want to be able to bring all of our subjects. We want to be able to do these 5 different events. Our film was about holistic healing and it featured Native American wisdom and all kinds of stuff. So we want to have this Native American elder who's featured in the film take people for a hike. We want to have this veteran who's featured in the film do this meditation experience. We want to have this woman who's featured in the film do this art project. And they said, great, do all of it. So we had cameras capture all of that, and then spliced in between audience members' response to it. Again, it was a little bit of work. It was a little bit of investment. We built it into our budget for the Impact campaign. So when we went out and we did fundraising, we're like, we need X amount so that we can hire 2 camera people to show up so that I can have a few days of editing. That one video alone funded a huge part of the rest of our campaign, because it got to show people in very practical terms, like all the different aspects of the campaign. So people could see, okay, this is how audiences are going to respond. Or I live in a place where if we brought this Native American elder, he could do a walk with them too. So they could really visualize all these different things. And it became sort of this menu item of things to choose from when inviting the film. But, in a much more experiential way. And like I said earlier, that film was shown at the board of this mental health organization, a board meeting. They didn't even see the film yet. They just watched this short video. And at the end of that meeting, they had decided to give us $75,000 for the next phase of our campaign. So these, and all of our other campaign partners just really appreciated it so much, because at the end of the day, that's going to be the legacy of these films, is, of these campaigns, is the effect that it had on people from from more of a heart space than just a head space. Yeah, and it's different for all of our films, but I think being able to report about the impact that it's actually having on people's lives is really valuable. For that's what it looked like for us for Almost Sunrise, and it might look a different, might look differently for your film, but it's important, I think, to think about that and how can we tell these stories, continue to tell these stories beyond just the film itself.